when they talk about how stressed out or how burned out they are, it's mixed with a little
Yeah.
bit of a pride.
Yes, wearing the burnout as a badge of honor because it was modeled to us. You're not doing well unless you're working hard, and you're not working hard unless you're suffering. When you have chronic stress and a busy brain and neuroinflammation, that negative self talk, wherever it's internalized from, will get louder. Reciting self worth mantras isn't going to help until you take down the neuroinflammation. And if we're under chronic stress and burnout, we are stressing our thyroid and adrenal glands, and we can push ourselves into early perimenopause.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sherry's channel. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart and it's something that I've been struggling with, which is the busy brain. So, today we have Dr. Romy Mushtaq, a board certified physician and award winning speaker on leadership and workplace wellness, and a STEMinist in stilettos. Dr. Romy, thank you so much for coming to my channel to talk about the busy brain cure because, gosh, do I need it? And do the
Oh,
people that I work with need this? This is, I think, something that we all struggle with. So I'm excited to have you here today because you didn't start off living this
no,
balanced life and understanding this. In
no.
fact, I love your story in Prada, your story in Silk. Can you share with us how this book all began, how your
It
journey
is.
into wellness began?
Sherry, thank you. It is an honor to serve your community, the people of Taiwan. And here is a fun fact that is not in the book. One of my favorite places to visit is the National Museum in Taipei. And I was there visiting before I got sick as a neurology professor with colleagues. And I, for the first time, felt quiet and peace. And there was something being in Taipei and being with the people that I realized something about my life when I went back to America working as a neurology professor wasn't right. I just didn't have a term for it. Back then, Sherry, even as a brain doctor, we didn't talk about our own mental health as professionals. The term burnout did not exist from the World Health Organization or in the medical literature. I just remember leaving the peace and the culture and the food and the people of Taiwan and going back to what felt like I was living out of control 120-hour work weeks. And I thought, you know what? I can fix it with another title. I'm a full professor and a researcher. I entered neurology in the United States at a time where less than 5% of the brain doctors in America were women. So that's why I call myself a STEMinist. And anytime I was having a negative emotion, I thought I could fix it by
Mhm.
going shopping and ordering
I
another pair of shoes. And I
love
allowed
that.
the labels on my body to be an armor, thinking that would protect me and my mental health. And I purposely write about that in the book. I used to feel shame about it, but I realized back then it was collecting Prada and Gucci or Chanel. Today it is showing all of that on Instagram or TikTok in or YouTube in search of happiness. We are looking outside to fill a void within.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started to have chest pain and ended up in life-saving surgery that I realized something was deeply wrong. And in my healing, I ended up returning to many of the countries in Eastern Asia to understand holistic healing, acupuncture, pranayama, Ayurveda, and mindfulness and meditation. And it is an honor to come and give back to the community where I feel I first had my wake up call.
Uh, That's wonderful. I think with hardworking people, especially hardworking women, if not collecting products, we're collecting titles, just like you
Absolutely.
said. We're looking outside for that satisfaction that never fulfills us. And you talk about feeling not at peace. And then having been to the National Museum, feeling that peace. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't get to feel that, so they don't know what they're missing. I think once you have a glimpse of that peaceful moment, through meditation or hiking, what have you, then you understand the discrepancy of the life that you lead.
Yes.
But so many of us, we don't even get that chance. We
Yes.
don't get that glimpse.
We don't, this was back in maybe 2006 or 7 when I was in Taipei. So I am overdue to come back and visit.
Please
And
do.
I would be honored, but also candidly, this was before the time of carrying an iPhone or Android phone and taking a picture of everything and selfies. So I had an old-fashioned camera, but I barely took pictures. It was about being present and
Right.
something about being anchored in generations of history of Asia. And, my parents are both of South Asian descent. There was a homecoming feeling that was there in that piece.
Right. Let's go back a little bit and talk about the actual illness you experienced.
Yeah.
And why do you think when the writing was on the wall, it still took to that point in the surgery room or when you found
Yeah.
out what you had to sort of snap you out of it?
Because when we use the external world as a measure, we stop focusing on the internal signals of our body, of our spirit, of our mind, until I say in English, it's the clouds open up and the universe, God throws a brick upside your head. And for me, that was ending up in life-saving surgery. And I thought, well, let me collect another title: professor, dutiful daughter, a dog mom, a homeowner, collecting the things. And I also had, which is also a part of our Asian culture, shame. I
Mhm.
would look to other colleagues, whatever their nationality or background was, and at least externally, they all seemed to be doing fine. So I felt additional shame of, am I some type of failure or not good enough that I'm physically and mentally struggling? And I just kept pushing myself. And then there are the stories we tell ourselves before the internalized dialogue comes out of, I have to push myself. I'm a single woman who is now divorced. I have to keep working to pay for my lifestyle and support myself. So I became a victim of my own success. And I think that is what we do. And when something is wrong, we think, well, let me just externally set another parameter for success. And we stress ourselves to get out there. What I call early in the book, you're stuck on the stress success cycle. And we have to break that.
I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I love
Yeah.
that in your book you talk about the voice of your aunties.
Yes.
And I just want to say this is, I think, a lot of people with Asian descent
Oh,
and
okay.
relate to. It's the voices in your head are not just from your parents, but your relatives or your parents' friends, right? Oh, you should do this. Like, how can you give up that? Like, you worked so hard to get here. How can you give that up?
I don't know if you experience this with all the consulting clients you work with here in the United States and in Europe. I work with many executives and high performing athletes. And the self confidence classes, working on the inner critic just doesn't help. And in my research, I found this is that when you have chronic stress and a busy brain and neuroinflammation, that negative self talk, wherever it's internalized from, will get louder.
Hmm.
And so, in our culture, especially, and thank you for naming that, but I find so many people relate to this. The negative voices we had when we were growing up, to your point, not just parents, elders, our cultural expectations, it could be a coach, that negativity overshadows any experience of gratitude, joy, positivity, self-worth in your brain. And reciting self-worth mantras isn't going to help until you take down the neuroinflammation. And that often for high achieving professionals, I purposely have the cutting, judgmental dialogue of my aunties in the book, because that may be the first symptom you recognize of something is not right. I might have a busy brain.
Right. There are so many points that you talk about that I really resonate with. I do coach a lot of people who work in semiconductors or high tech industry in Taiwan. And I think I see a little bit of that in myself as well. Working off of not gratitude, but scarcity, like
Hmm.
not good enough, right? So you push yourself a little bit more. And then you get that success, which in your book you talk about the dopamine hit.
Hmm.
That doesn't last long, right? And then you go back into being stressed again. And I often find that some people, when they talk about how stressed out or how burned out they are, it's an ambivalent feeling. It's mixed with a little
Yeah.
bit of a pride. Like,
Yes.
I get to be this stressed out. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
working on this huge client. I'm raising this fund. I'm doing this presentation. So you can almost sense that, yes, with that burnout, but the underlying, there is a sense of pride.
Yes. Wearing the burnout as a badge of honor. And
Yes,
it's
that's exactly
deeply,
it.
deeply cultural because it was modeled to us. You're not doing well unless you're working hard, and you're not working hard unless you're suffering. And I'm here in the Busy Brain Cure to say what you and I do now. We model, we can have success and do it without stressing ourselves out. Now, I'm a realist. I am also an entrepreneur. And one of my roles, in addition to being a speaker, is being a chief wellness officer for 13,000 employees. I'm in the C suite at Great Wolf Resorts here in the United States. And we all have deadlines. We all have reports that are due. But that's a sprint, maybe for a few days or a couple of weeks. We can't keep renewing that sprint into a marathon. There has to be periods where when we brain shift, we turn the channel from busy brain into how do I succeed without this attitude and understanding this cultural bias of I can be a good girl or good boy, or I can be a success without working night and day, without saying I'm busy and equating busy with successful.
Right, right. And I think you're demonstrating that right now because I sense there's a sense of calmness about
Yeah.
you. And reading the book, especially in the very beginning, you don't sense that at all,
No,
right?
no.
You describing as a younger doctor, you were stuck in the chocolate, wine, coffee cycle,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And just the way you described yourself, it's a very type A personality, right?
Frazzled, uncontrolled,
And that's not
reactive.
at all what I'm seeing right now. So do talk to us about how do we define the busy brain?
Yes.
Because I took your test and I thought there's no way people could get a score under 30. Because I'll tell you, I got a score at 65, 62, which you had mentioned in one of your speeches that if it's above 60, then it's a problem. And to be honest, while I was taking it, I was even being quite proud of myself. I'm like, see, I've improved. This is sometimes now. This is not all the time. And when I saw the score and then I saw what you wrote about the scores, and I thought, no way people could get under 30, like in
Oh,
this day and age,
yeah.
right? So
Thank you
can
for
you
being vulnerable and sharing.
yeah, please tell us what the busy brain is. And what are the symptoms? And I'd love to
Yes.
share with you what really resonated with me in this
Thank
book.
you. First, Sherry, thank you for modeling that vulnerability. When you and I both talk about what we faced as highly successful professionals, we are modeling to others that it is safe to say, I am not okay. This is not normal. The busy brain has nothing to do with your schedule or your to do list or how many projects you have going on. It is actually a pattern of neuroinflammation in the brain. Is the hypothalamus in the brain. For
Mhm.
non-medical people, it is your airport traffic control tower. So, imagine planes cannot take off or land in Taipei unless people in the airport traffic control tower are monitoring the traffic. And if there is bad weather in Taipei, in Singapore, in Kuala Lumpur, chances are flights are going to be delayed or canceled, even coming into Taipei.
Mhm.
And that is exactly how the brain works. When we're under chronic stress and we make another deadline, we set another goal and we keep busy and we're sleep deprived, it actually changes the structure and function and chemistry in the airport traffic control tower of the brain. And that in turn affects the rest of your brain and the rest of your body through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is all 50 of our hormones in our brain and our body. And what are the key symptoms that happen when we're in busy brain? Medically, highly intellectual individuals see ruminating anxiety, difficulty focusing, wondering, do I have attention deficit disorder? And the third is insomnia. And it looks like this is you can't focus at work. You're looking at multiple computer screens and your phone, and a simple task that should take you 3 minutes is now causing anxiety and taking 10 times the length. And you feel like you're out of control. Your to do list is multiplying faster than you can handle it. So you keep having caffeine. Like I used to have the caffeine and chocolate, the dopamine foods and sugar to keep going. And then at night, when you think I can calm down, here in the West, alcohol is used a lot. And, or maybe sedative medications to, so we're using chemicals to have energy in the day and chemicals to sedate ourselves at night. And then we end up in a vicious cycle over and over again, the stimulant sedative cycle. And
Mm.
that is what a busy brain is. When we look at the World Health Organization data and the data from the American Psychological Association, my data, we looked at the busy brain in 17,000 people. That's how we came up with the scale. So this is not something I made up. It is based on research of highly successful global professionals because this was the pandemic and we were doing virtual presentations. So many of the US, European based companies that are also all over South and East Asia were a part of this study.
Mhm.
And we found that only about 6.5 to 7% of people scored under a 30. And
That sounds
82,
about right.
yeah, 82% of people had a score above 40, which is starting to indicate chronic stress, busy brain, and burnout. So you're not alone. And also, maybe you are doing better when you have the self awareness as you do with all the tools and skills and knowledge you have, you're aware that my score was probably 10 to 20 points higher and I'm doing better. And that's the key is we want to do the brain shifts to improve.
Right. One thing that really does resonate with me, and I think a lot of my audience know that I struggle with insomnia. So I do meditate. I do sun salutations in the morning,
I love that.
right? Instead of coffee now. So I drink coffee a little later. So these are
Okay.
steps that I've consciously taken.
Mhm.
But I do find that at night I get nervous about not
Mhm.
being able to fall asleep.
Yeah,
So that creates a vicious cycle.
it
Right?
does.
It's like, oh, it's been 30 minutes, 40. I need to wake up tomorrow. So
Yeah.
I fully understand what was that cycle that you call the stimulant and
Stimulant sedative cycle,
sedative
where,
cycle?
yeah, we need caffeine. And here in the West, they're giving drugs for ADHD like Adderall and Ritalin to adults as performance enhancing medications to get you through the workday. That's ridiculous. And if it's not alcohol, it's a sleeping pill or anti anxiety prescription pill. And that's what I'm trying to stop. And I say this is I know your audience is largely professionals and will say about middle age 35 and older. It is so important that you and I are being vulnerable. Before I got sick, I had the same problem. I could not fall asleep. And if someone told me to breathe deeply or count sheep, it would make me even more anxious and agitated to fall asleep, right? We're at a point nobody wants to be told to eat berries, breathe, set boundaries. We need something more. And I really want to have a candid conversation. We're going to break down, but when we look at the root cause of burnout and what happens when our airport traffic control tower is in busy brain is we actually may be having deficiencies where we need to check labs and fix that. And we're going to talk about that when I hear that. So it is not a personality defect that you're awake at night and feeling anxious. It is an internal signal from your brain that there may be a hormone or nutrient deficiency that we need to check.
Mm, okay. That's so interesting because later on, I realized that cycle started to happen. I think it was during perimenopause.
Yes. Yes.
So, looking back though, I wonder which one triggered which first because my menopause came at an earlier age, at 45, which is considered early for our community. I think the average age here is about 51 or 2. So
Thank you for letting me know because when we look at women of East and South Asian descent in the United States, perimenopause is actually, and I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off,
oh, no, not
can
at all.
happen 5 to 12 years before menopause, where the period stops. And we actually find in women of Asian descent, the symptoms are very different than what you typically read about in the studies of Caucasian, American, and European women. That it is common to start at average earlier for Asian women around age 38 to 42, believe it or not, and not with the traditional symptoms we think of hot
Hot
flashes and loss of
flashes.
libido. The most common symptoms are insomnia and feeling anxious.
Thank you. I did not know that, but I
Yes,
didn't have any hot flashes, which meant that
exactly.
I did not think I was going through
Nope.
menopause.
Yes.
I had everything else. I had
Yes.
acid reflux. I had frozen shoulder. I had
Yes.
vertigo.
Oh my
Waking
goodness.
up
Yes.
one day, just couldn't even getting to the doctor. I threw up in the car.
Oh my
So
goodness.
very severe vertigo.
Yeah.
And none of those symptoms I realized had anything to do with menopause. And I thought it was all because I didn't sleep enough,
Oh,
which, you
it's
know,
related,
it's related, but
but this is exactly what we're talking about. The hypothalamus under chronic stress, the airport traffic control tower is throwing off all your hormones, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, and in women, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And it is uncommon or not as common in Asian women to have the hot flashes. But all the other hormones control our joints, your frozen shoulder, digestion, so acid reflux, irregular bowel movements, all the things that women complain about. And you think, this is just aging or I'm not taking care of itself. What's actually happening is for those of us women, so we use two different terms perimenopause, which is around
Mhm.
menopause, and then menopause is when the periods have actually stopped for 12 months or more. So perimenopause has all these symptoms from all these different areas in the body, but it's all related to the brain and to our hormones. And if we're under chronic stress and burnout, we are stressing our thyroid and adrenal glands, and we can push ourselves into early perimenopause. So, the key life saving tip I really want to highlight here and double click on, and I'm so thankful to serve my sisters throughout Asia is if these random symptoms are happening, demand that your doctor do a full thyroid panel and look at your adrenal glands. Because
Mhm.
even if the doctor is saying, oh, they're talking a lot about perimenopause, should we look at your estrogen, progesterone? If they don't correct your thyroid first, everything else will continue to suffer. And for many women, we must fix the thyroid and everything else all just starts to fall into place. And maybe the perimenopausal symptoms will even be delayed.
Interesting. Because I think
Mhm.
most women, under circumstances, would go check their hormones, their estrogen
Yes,
level, but
exactly.
not thinking about their thyroid.
Mm-mm. No. And so we need to check, and it's in the book in chapter 16. I have an, and it's on my website in English and it can be
Mhm.
translated. We've checked
Yeah.
through Google Translate. The list of labs for women is there. And also, I know you have many male colleagues. There's a separate lab list for men in there as well, because men's hormones are equally affected and they have different symptoms.
Yeah, yeah. I think I do feel bad because I've talked about menopause in two of my episodes with doctors, and I do have male audience saying, "What about us? We're going
Yes,
through stuff as well, um,
yes,
but it's not manifesting in a physical symptom such as hot flash or stopping a
yes,
period." So it's
yes.
harder to pinpoint, but they
Hmm.
do go through something. So I really appreciate you saying you have
Yes.
something like that for both men and women, right?
Yes. It
Okay.
is really important when men have a busy brain. The first thing I check with them, same issue. Airport traffic control towers off, the control of the thyroid is off for men as well. And then I check total and free testosterone and DHEA levels in men. And there is a misconception, oh, my libido is fine in men and sexual health is good. That's one of the later symptoms. If men are feeling anxious or revved up and can't focus, that's one of the earlier signs that from the brain and the rest of the hormones may be off, and we need to check that. And so it definitely shows up in men as well.
I'm just curious, are we're biologically set up to be this way, or I think what's triggering could be just that midlife crisis. I'm
Mm,
curious which one comes first. Is it our biology to at a
yes.
certain point, going through menopause or that midlife point where your brain starts to deteriorate and you become more anxious? Or is it around midlife? You were standing around. I remember being 45 and looking around thinking, well, life is half over. Is this it? Is
Oh,
this the
yeah.
projection, right?
No,
Can
it
I
is.
be more? And so I
Yes.
think that's where we become kind of anxious. It's like, okay, when you were
Agreed.
younger, you think if I work harder, I can reach my dream. But at a
Mm.
midpoint, you're kind of thinking, well, I'm running
What
out
did
of
I do this
time.
for?
Did I do
Yes.
this? Who did I do this for? Did I do it right? How come I'm not there? I
I
mean,
checked all the boxes. Why am I not happy?
all of
Yeah.
above, right? All of those could happen to any of us.
I
So could
used to
that,
think that way. I used to think that way. And I'm going to offer you a different term and tell me what you think, Sherry.
okay.
Instead, first of all, when you read about my story in the book and I was sick, I was in my young 30s. These symptoms started when I was 30, 31, and I had life-saving surgery at 34. And I try not to use the word midlife crisis and say midlife awakening.
Ah, that's wonderful.
Some of us are stubborn like me. Some people have to have that health crisis or walking on the edge of a relationship crisis to really have that awakening, and others, it naturally happens. So that's the first reframe. What do you think of that?
I think it's wonderful. But what you've said actually reminds me of I Ching a little bit of yin and yang. Everything
Yes,
has two sides,
yes,
and that what's
yes,
behind a crisis is actually an awakening or
absolutely.
opportunity.
It
So
is.
I think
Yes,
they go hand in hand,
they do.
but that reframing is great for people who are
It is.
going through it
Yes,
because then it's
it is.
appreciative inquiry. It's not a crisis we're going through, but it really is crisis slash awakening, right?
Yes,
It's a yin
yes.
and yang.
I want to also highlight, looking at the mental health data in preparation for meeting you in Taiwan, busy brain can also happen to Gen Z and millennials, so professionals in their 20s and 30s. So this isn't about midlife. And we see the rates of anxiety in Taiwan have doubled in the last 15 years. A lot of it, people say, is it because the stigma has been reduced and we're measuring it more? I do think that there are other factors, such as this pushing ourselves and burnout and the social isolation from the pandemic and the digital devices, everything that I cover in my book. And so I don't want anyone listening to this to think this is something that happens in midlife. And
Right.
those of us that are leaders and we have employees or team members that are in their 20s and 30s, they are not immune to busy brain. And
Yeah.
maybe we can help them earlier before they have a life or health crisis.
Absolutely. I think as Gen X's or
Yes.
older than
Yes.
millennials, we were blessed of not having digital devices when
I
we were
agree.
younger.
Yes.
I can't even imagine the stress that I would feel if I have to, as a teenager, seeing other people's clothes or their
Yes.
social life
Yes.
online all the time, what
Yeah.
kind of stress that would create. So I'm really happy that we were blessed that we didn't have to experience that until midlife,
Yes.
where then we understood what binge watching Netflix means, what being
Yes.
addicted to your phone means. But kids nowadays, they don't have that luxury. Um,
Agreed.
so yes, this book definitely is not just for people in
Yes.
midlife. I
Yes.
For people younger and younger now, so unfortunate that
Yes.
they may need this too. So for the people who haven't taken the test, where I got a score of 62, can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek of what are
Yes.
the questions that
Absolutely.
we should ask ourselves?
This is again not a test that I made up, and you know, Sherry, you'll appreciate this is a validated neuropsychology stress test that we relabeled the busy brain test because I was going into global companies and I
Mhm.
couldn't say I'm a brain doctor doing research and here's a psychology test, you know. And we looked at data in 17,000 people, and the reason was we knew that our brains were being rewired from the changes that were happening in a post-pandemic world. And I really wanted to understand what was happening. So you're asked 20 questions, and it takes less than 4 minutes, and it's in the book for you. And for English speaking, it is on my website, drromy.com, and on my Instagram. You take it for free. And you answer questions like, I have difficulty falling asleep at night. And you choose never, sometimes, always. And just think about the last 2 weeks in your life, and you will get a score. And ideally, you're in your brain power if you score under a 30, which I mentioned, less than 6 to 7% of people taking this test get there. Most people will fall on the borderline, you know, between 30 to 40. We call that brain drain. Okay, you're in a sprint. We need to slow down and do a brain shift reset. But if you start scoring above a 40, this is when we know the mental and physical symptoms of chronic stress and busy brain turn up. And above a 60, I'm actually worried that you're burned out. And could this be manifesting as a disease? And
Mhm.
that's why I share my story in the book so people can walk in my stilettos in the hospital, watching myself push with these symptoms, like you said, that just seemed random. Not sleeping, feeling anxious, medicating with chocolate and coffee, acid reflux, couldn't swallow. You just couldn't piece it together. And it turned out I was having a spiritual, mental, and physical crisis. And so that's what the busy brain test is going to tell you. In simple terms, you get a brain score. I think, you know, we all know what our financial health score is. We
Mhm.
should know our brain score, and we should prioritize keeping our brain scores healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think that I'm privileged to have that awareness now, but I do look around and see a lot of my friends or colleagues or the people that I coach, they are really experiencing burnout and they don't know it. Or
Yeah.
they have a hard time acknowledging it because the environment that they're in.
Yeah.
Everyone is experiencing the exact same thing. So it becomes the norm.
Yes.
Right. So, can you talk a little bit about burnout and how living in our society in this day and age, if your culture, if where you work, where you live, that's the norm, how do you change that? How do we empower a person to say, hey, look, this is not normal. We need to take a break? Because I do see younger people saying that now and
Yes.
they're labeled as lazy, right? It's
Mm.
so easy to label another generation. Like, I don't get these Gen Zs. I don't get these, right, millennials because they're different. Um, but I'm looking at that label, and part of it is that fight back to say, no, I don't want to be stressed out like you. Like, I don't want to answer your call 24/7. I don't
Yes.
think that's normal. And you have that pushback from the authorities, from the power within the
Yes.
company saying, well, that's lazy. That's not
Yeah.
being committed to your job. So I do think a lot of people struggle. A lot of my
We
clients
agreed.
struggle.
You know, this is a global crisis, and you just gave the example so beautifully. And I think the work you and I do inside companies, I often say we're teaching the 5 generations in the workplace how to speak to each other and understand each other. And the rate of change in the world of policies and technology is can create this change fatigue. And we cannot succeed as a company. I'm saying this from the lens of an organizational wellness expert and a chief wellness officer. We can no longer use these outdated models of this authoritarianism from the top, you know, the C suite, the doctor in charge of the clinic or whatever, driving toxic work conditions that are feeding into the burnout, this inability to disconnect, you know, for a personal life, the inability to take sick leave or a vacation without being expected to plug into work on your vacation days.
Mhm.
And that is shows up in the bottom line. There is global data that shows the more toxic a work environment and unhealthy stigmas we have, mislabeling other generations or groups of people, and not having understanding and inclusivity reduces productivity, reduces the bottom line, drops engagement, and increases turnover. And so the minute you translate that into financial ROI for the people in charge, you and I get them to listen. So, first, it is starting from the top. How does that become a reality? I will tell you how many times, Sherry, in the last, I started to research the Busy Brain Cure in 2018, and the book was published in 2024. How many times a boss, a leader, a C suite executive would be sitting in the auditorium, and I've come as the keynote speaker with their arms crossed and be like, we have a brain doctor talking about mental health. Like, what is this? And then they would get their own brain score. And I typically in a lecture in America, it's okay to do, it's not, too culturally challenging to ask people raise your hand if your score was above a 30. And the minute the leader CEO sees 80% of the people in this room raise their hand, there's an aha moment. Numbers don't lie. So we have to have a wake up call to our leaders.
Yeah.
And I think now, as an elder, as an auntie myself, you see in the book, as I heal my busy brain, the internal voices of auntie go from judgment to wisdom and hope. I try to be that auntie to the millennials and Gen Z in our workplace and companies. And I think what wisdom they have that we can learn from them. Had it
Right.
not been for millennials and Gen Z during the pandemic, they blew open the mental health crisis globally using social media. And I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, I love the way you framed this because we do see a lot of labeling of different generations, and
Mhm.
that's one of the most challenging or most requested task that I get asked as an
Mm.
organizational consultant. How do I talk to that different generation? But I'm
Yes.
looking at it from a larger scheme of things is that we need to experience a paradigm shift, right?
Yes.
I understand it's difficult for people in the C-suite to see that because right away they're going to see decreasing productivity. Because if you ask someone to work 14 hours a day, 18 hours a day,
Yeah.
versus 8, I
Hmm.
think right away you will see a drop.
Absolutely. The number, and I'll send you the study via email when we're done speaking. I was pulling up some data in Taiwan. The number is 49 hours. You're more likely to have burnt out, disengaged employees who lose productivity if they're being asked to work more than 49 hours a week. Now, the traditional leader or C suite executive, not all, but many may say, I work more than 49 hours and I'm just fine. And I sit down with them
And
and
they're
do
not fine.
a whole person assessment, and it's not really the case. There are key areas, financially, relationship, health, that may be struggling. And so, one, they are not fine. And two, when we see that employees are given that flexibility, that morale and productivity actually improves
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
there's a tipping point for all of us with our busy brains that you add one more item to my to-do list and you hit that busy brain state, it's going to take me hours to complete that task. Whereas when I brain shift, I can get that task done in under 20 minutes. And
Right.
that's what's happening when we don't deal with busy brain and burnout in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking for those that we call lazy at work, right? Not working hard enough. How come the young kids nowadays aren't committed to work? And I think to myself, well, what about our generation? Because for those of us who had awakenings, usually take something big. And then you shut your life down and go, okay, I need to work on my body. So that pushback at a younger age, is that really a bad thing? I mean, I do understand the complexity of our economic system where, your country needs you, your community needs you, your employee needs you can't make major changes. But I think coming together and recognizing that
Yes.
this culture is
Yes.
toxic and not sustainable is the first
Yes.
step. Um,
I don't want to blame all the elders. What I think is the work you and I do inside organizations is to bring people together to talk about those attitudes, that the truth and the wisdom is somewhere in between.
yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
you may not know somebody's full story. They may be a caregiver to elderly loved ones and they need to leave work early, and you've misjudged them because you have a busy brain. You're burned out. So you're projecting negativity, calling them lazy or not dedicated to the company when actually they are. And they love their job, but they also have a competing priority. And they're saying, I'm modeling to you having harmony in my life
Hmm.
and being able in any given moment to switch competing priorities. And it's not an all or nothing zero sum game where if I leave work early for something in my personal life, all of a sudden I'm a lazy employee.
Right.
And not all bosses or leaders of our Gen X or boomer generation are toxic and say,
Right,
stress,
right.
release
Please
stress, go
don't.
walk it off. I think there is a happy medium for all of us to sit down and learn from one another. And those conversations are going to look different in every industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point about having less empathy when you have that busy brain.
Yes,
When you
yes,
are under stressed,
yes,
you don't have that cognitive agility to have empathy, to
yes,
see maybe this person isn't lazy,
yes,
right? Because you are laser focused on what you're trying to get done. I think that's from my previous experience. You're just not
yeah,
empathetic in that moment.
yes. Agreed. Literature globally suggests that because the higher your busy brain score is, the closer you are to burnout. You have emotional exhaustion. You do not see the wins at work. You don't have purpose in your work. Everything is a task. And then you project that onto everyone else. And so I love your reframe that, yeah, when your brain channel is set to busy brain, the empathy channel is turned off.
Yeah.
And you know, we can heal together and have empathy and listen and learn from one another. Because when leaders have the opportunity to quiet their busy brain and heal and listen, innovations start happening inside the company.
Yeah. You wrote your book, I think, on page 36, that emotions change how the brain functions. I was so interested in this sentence because I study personality and behavior psychology, right? As a psych major, that was our focus when we are in college. And then as organizational psychologists, you're thinking about the external factors that causes your emotions to change. But here, you talk about emotions change how the brain functions. Would our personality or the our brain makeup, let's say for MBTI, like I'm ENTJ, loving the to-do list, loving checking that off, getting that dopamine hit. It's all about crossing things off. I'm curious if our personality or the way our brain is shaped also sort of causes that to have certain you're more likely to experience certain emotions.
That is brilliant. And I would love to learn that from you as an expert in MBTI. I am ENFJ. And what I think we know is when someone has done that work, they are given the toolkit for emotional regulation and self
Mhm.
regulation. When I talked about emotions will change the structure and function of the brain, I'm talking not about personality traits, but psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. And so, psych is your emotions, your mood. So, you read about my frazzled, anxious, angry mood in the beginning of the book. And that negativity fuels the neuroinflammation. So, psych to neuro, the structure and function of the brain that now affects your immune system, and endocrine, your entire hormone system. So, what really is happening is when I lacked the self awareness and was frazzled, I was allowing outside circumstances at work in my personal life to dictate my mood.
Mm,
And when we heal a busy brain and Definitely therapy works. I'm so thankful for my therapist. I would not be here today without therapy and learning some of those
Too.
tools. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy helped me. I've been trained in it, meditation practices, all those things that help our emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. Then all of a sudden, those same external problems can be there on social media, at work, and in the political landscape of the globe, but we're not reacting emotionally to it.
Hmm.
That's how I see it. I would love your wisdom as someone that specializes in, the Myers-Briggs. Tell me what you think. Do you think certain personality types would be more prone to a busy brain? That's fascinating to me. I never thought of it in that lens.
I have my hypothesis, but I don't have valid data to back it up. It's
Okay.
really from my own experience. I
Mm-hmm.
do think TJ types, their busy brain is that dopamine addiction
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
finding out, crossing things off,
Yeah.
getting things done, and
Yes.
always having goals in life. And I think for FJ types like yourself, the busy brain is more the aunties that I need to
Yes.
please, right? I need to please all of these people's expectations because I want harmony. And
Yes.
I think for TP types, any types of TPs, it's the addiction for information, the truth.
Ah.
I'm looking for, so there's no time boundary. Like I
Mm.
want to know what's real and true. And I think for FP types, the busy brain is emotional one. Like I'm
Interesting.
experiencing all sorts of different emotions, and you can get that online
Yes.
now, right?
Yeah.
Just click and go.
Yes.
So I have my hypothesis that different types have different types of busy brain,
Yeah.
but I think they are everyone is um
Can be
has it.
prone, and the
Yeah.
symptoms will show up a little differently. I mean,
Yeah.
so well said. And I can't wait to take that clip and share it. And I never broke it down that way, but it is beautifully said.
Well, it's my hypothesis, so I don't I'm not really
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But you talked about neuroinflammation, and
Hmm.
inflammation is a word that's it's sort of the center of my life for the past few months because I've been cutting off sugar completely
Excellent.
because I just had stomach issue and
Mm.
had consistent inflammation. And my doctor very kindly suggested that I try this for a little bit, and the numbers went down. But I
Excellent.
love that you talk about diet and nutrition,
Hmm.
and you talk about the stimulant sedative cycle, but you don't push people to quit sugar or a
Yeah.
coffee right away. And
No.
you still embrace comfort food. So I just want to say to people, I had to quit sugar because I was at an extreme state.
Yes.
But I think earlier when people suggested to me any type of method that said you need to cut coffee and sugar, I'd be like, nah, I think
No.
I'm good.
Mm-mm.
But I
Mm-mm.
love that you are you give people grace and say, hey,
Practical.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
that's not
So
realistic.
caffeine is not evil. And what we know for most people, caffeine from natural sources, so from coffee, from tea, from cacao, is
Yes.
actually very healthy for you earlier in the day. So it goes along with your circadian rhythm, your dosha type, your Ayurveda. I mean, all of that, the cycle is natural to have caffeine. What is a problem globally is this diet culture. Diet is a four-letter or curse word in my company and in research. And I'll tell you something, Sherry. I speak for a living. Companies hire me to speak globally. There's been one time that I got a standing ovation in the middle of my talk, and I was speaking at the American Counseling Association, and I showed them the toxicity of the diet culture and what it's doing to mental health and busy brain and burnout. And I got a standing ovation that we need to stop the diet. And to tell everyone blanket wise that you need to cut sugar is actually wrong. For many women that have adrenal fatigue and perimenopause, sure, cutting high glycemic foods that spike your blood sugar, but not cutting all carbs, it's actually dangerous for many women. We need some type of complex carbohydrate as a source of fuel to get going through the day,
Mhm.
or it could stress our nervous system, gut health, and hormonal health even more. So then there is this complexity of I'm a chief wellness officer to people of diverse backgrounds from all over the globe. We all have our own nutrition preferences and lifestyles that are tied to cultures and to religions, and to demand someone be vegan or vegetarian or keto or intermittent fasting, again, is irresponsible from a health point of view and from cultural competency
Mhm.
and inclusivity. So I had to find the solution of how could I heal your burnout without putting anybody on a diet or a cleanse and make it fun and create systems that were setting you up for success. So, number one, we say once to twice a week, have comfort food.
Mm.
Comfort food is different than stress eating. Comfort food is that next time you come to the US or I come to Taiwan, we sit down face to face and enjoy a meal together, sharing a meal of favorite foods with someone and not feeling guilty for what's on the plate. Then the brain shifts we studied. We need you to heal the burnout. There's an 8 week plan. And week 5 and 6, we tackle how do I improve your daytime energy so you don't need so much caffeine.
Mhm.
And that was actually if you're going to have caffeine, then no sugar for 1 hour before or after. And
Mm.
if something happens in the day and you're like, that donut, that croissant, that piece of bread looks great, then don't have caffeine 1 hour before or after. White
Oh,
rice, white potato, white sugar, white bread, and
this
white
is
flour.
but this is so interesting because when we drink black coffee or when we have dessert, we want black coffee to go with it.
That's the hard part. It's so cultural all over the world, whether you are a tea drinker, a coffee drinker, we have some type of bread and croissant in the morning or donut or bagel, or we have a treat with it. And so it's the idea is divorcing the two. And the reason is caffeine is a wonderful neurostimulant. But if you spike your blood sugar and stimulate the insulin receptors in the brain, you're actually creating what I call frazzle and busy brain, or
Mm.
the adenosine receptors and insulin receptors are fighting each other. You can't focus. You're literally creating ADHD brain by the
Wow.
chemicals in your body, chemical reaction in your body. So have one or the other. Now, what happened? We tested this 8 week protocol in over 1,000 executives, and it's by week 5 or 6, they're having comfort food once a week. They can't believe it. I'm like, sure, enjoy the barbecue, enjoy the ramen noodles, have at it, like have a great meal. It is your child's birthday. Please have the cake and the ice cream and enjoy it. And they were sleeping again. And then, we were doing these biohacks of either have the caffeine or the sugar. Most people not only normalize their busy brain score and were sleeping, but they were dropping a pant or a dress size and
Wow.
still eating comfort food. And that was the magic. And then the second, when you divorce the sugar and caffeine from each other, the second step in week 6 or brain shift 6, which is in the book and outlined, is to add a serving of healthy fat, 1 to 2 servings each meal, which naturally I know occurs if you're having a traditional diet there in Taiwan. If you're eating some of the processed Western food, it kind of runs amok. But, the seafood and seaweed and nuts and just so many, the healthy oils that our food is cooked with there. So it naturally happens, but for every meal.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think back and I think, wait, did I trigger myself by trigger my hormone mix up by not eating carbs? That could be a possibility
Yes.
because after
Yes.
baby
Yeah.
number 3, I struggled to lose the 30 kilos that I gained
Yeah.
and, going to that no carbs diet.
Yeah.
And I think even when I was doing it, I knew it was doing a number on my body, but I was
Yeah.
younger then and I thought,
Yeah.
well, I want to look better and this is the most effective way. So thank you for letting us know that we can be more compassionate towards ourselves,
It
that
is.
we don't have to have
Agreed.
a hard regimen of diet and
Yeah.
cleanse and
Yeah.
force ourselves to not eat the things that we love and
I mean, a
live
no
a hard
carb
life.
diet in Asia, we'd have to give up rice and noodles? No.
Yeah.
that's not our culture. It's not our lifestyle. It's not our ancestral DNA. And scientifically also it's wrong because any woman, even, in your fertility cycle, if someone is having postpartum, thyroid is a little abnormal, which can happen to most women, the stress of pregnancy in the body and breastfeeding. If someone has PCOS, then to have adrenal fatigue when you're cutting out all carbs, it is stressing the adrenal gland even more, and that will stress estrogen progesterone levels. So at a young age, it'll affect
Mhm.
fertility, and in middle age, it'll bring on perimenopause quicker.
That
So,
probably was what did it. And I think, Dr. Romy, you talk really all about compassion in your book. And I love the 8 weeks plan. Can you tell us a little bit, give us a brief preview of your practical framework and how we can use this book? I
yeah,
carry this book with me everywhere. These are all
I'm
wrinkled.
so honored. Thank
Yeah.
you, Sherry. Truly honored. And thank you for honoring, that work that was born from me burning out, having life-saving surgery, sitting in the hospital saying there has to be a different way to live,
Yeah.
and doing the research and coming back to help others. And by sharing this on your platform, even if we save one life, then you and I have had this conversation for a profound reason. And that is why I created that 8-step program. I'm a neurologist specializing in integrative and functional medicine. To see doctors like myself is very expensive and difficult globally. I wanted to democratize the protocol and put it in a book that people could easily buy, walk through themselves, go to their local doctor, and get those labs checked. So we made it in a way that was simple for people to execute who are busy professionals, parents, and caregivers. Give me 30 minutes a day, and we're going to add one step every week called brain shifts to set you up for success and heal. And that is exactly. And so we talked about brain shift 5 and 6 briefly. You're not going on a diet. We're just changing your nutrients a little bit and how and what time you eat. That's all.
Yeah. And it's really, if it's really hard, I would have been like, I need to push it off. But really, you've set the goals in nice, easy steps,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Week
They
one.
build on each other that you don't even notice. People would come back and going, "Is this all I'm doing this week?" And I'm like, "Yeah, how are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm sleeping great."
I love that. I
Yeah.
love a very easy to
Yeah.
follow and
Yeah.
not making you bend yourself backwards type of plan.
No.
That's sustainable. So you don't give up by
Yes.
week three.
Yes. And so because you don't want your healthcare plan to feel like a part-time job. We
Yes.
all have full lives. It should just fold into your life as you give yourself compassion and quiet the voices of the aunties in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, the aunties for sure. But I do hope that instead of those aunties, we have installed your voice as the new auntie. And I think what you've also talked about is the importance of community. You've
Yeah.
urged the readers of your book. You have this website, so we can sort of all support each other and even hold each other accountable in some ways, sort of gentle reminder that we're all in this together. We're a cohort of learners trying to cure our busy brain. I love that as an organizational psychologist because you're not putting that much pressure on the individual. Like
Correct.
it's all your responsibility to
Yes.
get better,
Yes.
but you're building a community. So,
Yes.
can you tell us why you thought this is important? And what made you want to build this community, and why did you see that having a community is much better than not having one, the difference in that?
We're social beings. And I know personally going on a scary health journey is so isolating and you feel alone. And yet everyone is walking around with a busy brain. And we know from an organizational psychology and wellness point of view that the team that stays fit together succeeds together.
Mm.
And, long gone are the days where team building exercises are we're going to go out to the bar and drink together. That's not very inclusive. And so we thought, what if this started in the pandemic when people were working virtually, but teams still call me to implement this in person, is we're going to bring teams connected together to say, you're not alone in having a busy brain or burnout. There are other colleagues here. We're going to heal it. And the leaders are going to be there with you modeling this. And everyone is on an equal playing field. Nobody's one busy brain is important than anybody else's. And to your point, the cohort based learning, when you have accountability and we're making it fun and it's making social connection, and you're in shock going, oh, wow, she's letting us eat comfort food. This is phenomenal. The change will stick. And in the middle of those conversations and the virtual chats that we set up for companies when we run this program, leaders get to see those aha moments of employees saying, oh, I can handle this, or I feel more engaged, or this thing I was complaining about work is no longer a complaint because I've healed my busy brain. And innovative solutions come up to systems based problems. And people now are healing busy brains. So they're open to use your, wisdom earlier with empathy and compassion to listen.
Mm. Yeah. I do want to share one last thing with you is that I don't know if you know, I've also just interviewed Dr. Tara, who is
Yes.
a neuroscientist,
Yes.
and I have this strong sense that talking to both of you, that this is the beginning of a paradigm shift. And I
Mm.
think it's going to take female women doctors, Western trained, but with Asian, South Asian descent who are familiar with yoga, with meditation, with the study of spirituality, to sort of speak the language of the more male centric and the more patriarchal world that we live in, to sort of start that awareness, that awakening, and that balance in our lives. And I do think that you were picked to start the revolution. And it's sort of a calling that I see in the both of you. And I'm very grateful and very honored for you to come to my show and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for being that hope holder and holding that vision for myself, for Dr. Tara, and you being a part of that paradigm shift. You're absolutely right. The rate of the world is changing, and we can't forget to meld the ancient wisdom with modern science. And science and spirituality are no longer two separate entities, but go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I call it, you are one of my hope holders, and what an honor. And I am here doing the same for you. You are offering healing.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Romy. Thank you for coming on my show. And